I've been getting a lot of questions lately about the best way to put plants into a pond. Should you use soil? Do you need a basket? Can you just plant them in rocks? How should you plant in a pond? So I thought I'd make this video and show you how I put my plants into my pond. Now the pond you see behind me isn't my natural pond. This one has a pump and a waterfall, as you can see. Still a pretty nice pond. Now it has water lilies in here, and those water lilies were put into a pot, but they've since grown out of that pot, and it doesn't really matter how I put them in. I could have just taken those water lilies and dumped them in the water and they would grow. They don't really need anything. In today's video, I'm going to get some iris from the garden. These are Iris Louisiana, and they like to grow in a wet area. In fact, in nature, they actually grow in the water. So I'm going to move some from my garden to the pond and see if they grow better there. They're not really happy where they are now. In the process, I'll show you different ways of planting. One way that's quite common is to use these special pots, which are designed for ponds. But in water, you want that water going in and out all the time to the roots. So these are okay. I don't usually use these for a couple reasons. One is they're relatively expensive compared to regular pots. And the second reason is that they're just too small. If I put anything in here, it's going to grow outside of it in no time at all. So I'm constantly going to have to take this out and get the plant out and replant it and put it back in the pond. I don't want to do that. I want to put my plants in the pond and let them go. So I wouldn't use these. Even when I do water lilies and I want a pot to sink them down to the bottom of the pond, I wouldn't use these. I just use a regular pot. Just try to pick one that has a lot of holes in the bottom, and that works fine. One of the questions that people ask all the time is, do I want soil in these pots? And in fact, most of the advice online will tell you to put heavy clay soil around your roots in a pot like this and then put them in the water. That really makes no sense at all. If we think about it, what does the soil do for our plants? Well, it does two things. One is it holds the plant in place. The second thing it does is it provides nutrients for that plant to grow. Soil is full of nutrients, and all that organic matter that's in the soil is slowly decomposing and providing more nutrients for the plant. But in a pond, we want to keep the nutrient level as low as possible. And when there are excess nutrients, we want the plants to use them up. So it makes no sense putting soil that's full of nutrients into your pond. So take those plants and get rid of that soil. I'm going to show you a much better way to do this. These are the iris I'm going to move into the pond. All the iris in here are the same thing. They're Louisiana Iris, and this is a bog garden, so it's reasonably wet, but they're still not really happy here. So I'm trying to find a better way to grow these. So I'm going to take the ones near the front, put them in my pond, and I'll leave the others here in case these guys don't like the pond and they just die. Now it's middle of summer and it's not a great time to transplant these, but we got to remember we're going to put them into the pond so they won't have any trouble getting water. That's a better clump. Take all the old leaves off because that'll just add more organic matter to the pond, and we're trying to keep that to a minimum. Now I'm trying to get most of the soil off, but if there's a little bit on there, I'm not going to damage a whole bunch of roots to get it off. This is a blue Cardinal flower, and since it's sitting here and we got a piece, we'll put that in the pond too and see how it does. It is a bog plant, so it should do all right up there. All right, I'll take these up to the pond and see you there. I built this pond about 12 years ago, and it's been a great success. There's almost no algae. The plants that grow really well. But for some reason, I never really finished this planting bed. So all the way around the pond, I have these planting ledges. They have larger rock along the outside and smaller rock in here. And the large ones are there to hold the small ones in place. When I have the water up to its normal level, those rocks will just be covered. So you can see that we're down about 2 inches here. It's been a very hot summer and I haven't really topped it up yet. The way I built the pond, it takes into account rising and lowering levels of water. Even though the water level is now low, you don't see a pond liner anywhere. It still looks natural. This can come up 2 inches and look just as natural. The outer ring of larger rocks help keep these smaller rocks in because the bottom of the pond has nothing in it except the liner. I don't want junk down there because I'll just have to go in and get those rocks. So I want these smaller rocks up here. I've got rocks in here. I did this earlier today, and there's an area here that's still a little too deep. I need to put in a few more rocks. And that's really all there is to making a planting shelf. Now you might wonder, well, what kind of rocks do I use? Well, I use whatever rocks I have. As I'm gardening, every time I dig a hole to plant something, I find rocks and I collect those and make little piles around the garden. And then when I need small rocks for a project, I just go around the garden and collect them all. The size really isn't important. It's nice to have some variation, and it's nice to have a few larger rocks, which you'll see in a minute. But other than that, the size doesn't matter. The type of rocks also doesn't matter. Don't worry about the shape or size, that's not important. Just get yourself some cheap rocks, put them in, you got a planting shelf. It's time to do some planting. So I take my iris and just put it in the water. Now if it sits there on its own, that's good. If you want, you can put a rock on top of it to kind of hold it in place. Over here, hold that one down, but the plants really won't go anywhere because there's no moving water here, so you don't really have to do this. The smaller ones I just set somewhere. Even if they're laying down, they'll straighten themselves up in a few days. And then you might remember we had this blue lobelia. And that's really all there is to planting. Because they're sitting in water, they're going to get lots of moisture. Even though it's late June, I don't have to worry about them getting too hot. They got a nice cool area here with lots of water to drink. They will be fine. Let's talk a little bit about maintenance of plants. With irises like this, I really don't do anything to them. I just let them grow. If I get too many, it gets too crowded, then I pull some out, give them a little more space. I don't fertilize anything because the whole point of a natural pond is that these plants take the nutrients out of the water, so I don't want to add any more nutrients. You could come along in the spring and take the dead vegetation off, take it away, it'll look a little neater, and keep some organics out of the pond. That's actually a good thing, but to be honest, I don't bother with that. If you're wondering which plants you should use, I'll make a separate video on that sometime. But the golden rule is use something that's native to your area. It'd be hardy, it's not going to spread into the wild. Now these iris are not native here, but we do have native iris, so it's a close nativar. I have two different species of cattails. They both seeded themselves. The cattails used to fill this whole bed here, but they got so overcrowded. Last year I took most of them out, and I'm going to keep the cattails at the end of the pond and grow something else in here. The pickerel weed here is native to Ontario. My water lilies, I started with the white one, and I collected that from a local pond here that is just chock full of water lilies. So there's so many of them you can't even see the water. So removing a few roots wasn't going to hurt the environment. The red one is actually a cultivar that a friend of mine gave me. It's a larger flowered plant, the leaves are larger, and it's really fantastic. So use whatever water lily you want. I think they're absolutely necessary for a pond. They just look so great. And the other thing they do is they reduce the amount of light that gets to the water, and so you get less algae growth. Now you may have noticed that I walk along my planting shelves, and you might be concerned that when I step on these sharp rocks, I'm going to puncture the liner. But if you built the pond correctly, the way I've described in my book, that's not a problem. I'm not going to get any punctures along my planting beds. This native grass here seeded itself. I don't know where that came from, but it looks pretty nice here, so I'm going to leave it. I already have one of my frogs has come to check out the new iris in the beds here. If you like to know how to build a pond like this, with no pumps, no chemicals, no electricity, I've written a book called Building Natural Ponds. And if you're interested in that, click on the picture of the book. If you want to see more pond building videos, click on the link in the top right-hand corner and I'll take you to my list of pond videos. I also run a Facebook group called Building Natural Ponds, so come and join us on that Facebook group. I hope you enjoy building your next pond.